Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
Quinn Marlowe sat at her desk in the converted warehouse that housed both her office and workshop, surrounded by half-finished furniture pieces that would soon bear her signature craftsmanship. The morning light filtered through the industrial windows, casting geometric patterns across the concrete floor where sawdust danced in the air. At 34, she had built Marlowe artisan furniture from nothing but determination and raw skill. Each custom piece a testament to the grit she'd learned during a childhood spent bouncing between 7 different foster homes. The business occupied 3,000 square feet of reclaimed industrial space in southeast Portland, complete with specialized woodworking equipment she'd bought piece by piece over 8 years. Her client list included tech executives, restaurant owners, and interior designers who paid premium prices for furniture that would outlast trends and generations. Every joint was hand-cut, every finish applied with patience most people couldn't understand. Her phone buzzed against the reclaimed oak surface she'd crafted herself from a 100-year-old barn beam. A text message. She set down the fine-grit sandpaper she'd been using and glanced at the screen, expecting a client update or a question from Tate. Instead, she saw Brooke's name. Quinn wiped sawdust from her fingers before typing. "Hey, what time's the engagement dinner tonight?" She'd been looking forward to it, actually, despite everything. Despite years of feeling like the family outsider, she'd bought a new dress, made dinner reservations for afterward with Tate to celebrate her brother's happiness, even picked out a thoughtful engagement gift, a custom wine rack made from reclaimed wood, something that would last decades. The response came back within minutes, casual and careless, as if you were commenting on the weather. "Oh, we already had it yesterday. Just close family." Quinn stared at the message until the words burned into her retinas. Just close family. The gift box containing the wine rack sat on her desk, wrapped in cream paper with a silver bow. She'd spent 12 hours crafting it, choosing each piece of wood carefully, sanding until the grain felt like silk under her fingers. She read the message again, then a third time, as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something that didn't slice through 29 years of sisterhood with surgical precision. Just close family. The irony was brutal. She'd learned about family loyalty in foster homes where biological siblings were separated, where Christmas meant wondering if anyone would remember you existed. She'd promised herself that when she found real family, she'd never take it for granted, never assume it would last. She should have known better. She set the phone down with deliberate care, her fingers steady despite the rage building behind her ribs. This wasn't new. Brooks and his fiancée Marcy had always treated her like a convenient outsider, someone to include when they needed something, someone to forget when it mattered. But this one was different. This one slice through years of carefully built armor. Quinn picked up her phone again and typed back, "Cool. Hope it was nice." She hit send before she could write what she really wanted to say, before she could ask why 29 years of being his sister apparently didn't qualify her as close family, before she could remind him of every scraped knee she'd bandaged, every school play she'd attended when their parents were too busy, every time she covered for him when he stumbled home drunk in high school. Instead, she set the phone aside and went back to sanding the maple dresser in front of her. The rhythmic motion helped channel the fury coursing through her veins, back and forth, until the wood was smooth as silk and her breathing had returned to normal point. 20 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Brooks. "We should all get dinner soon, though. Marcy's been asking about you." Quinn almost laughed. Almost. Marcy asking about her was like a shark asking about a swimmer, purely predatory interest. She didn't respond. The farmer's market on Saturday morning buzzed with the kind of energy that made Portland feel like a small town pretending to be a city. Quinn walked between the stalls with Tate Holleran, her warehouse manager, and the closest thing to family she'd chosen for herself. At 41, Tate had the weathered hands of someone who'd spent his life working with wood and metal, and the kind of dry humor that could defuse a bomb. "You're grinding your teeth again," Tate said, stopping at a booth selling hand-forged kitchen knives. He picked up a cleaver, testing its weight. "What did your brother do now?" Quinn selected an apple from the adjacent fruit stand, turning it over in her hands. "Engagement dinner. Yesterday. I wasn't invited." "Ah." Tate set the cleaver down and looked at her. "The close family treatment. You know me too well." "I know them too well." Tate handed the vendor a 20 for the knife. "Your brother's always been a special kind of stupid, but this feels deliberate." Quinn bit into the apple, the tart juice sharp on her tongue. "It is deliberate. It's always been deliberate." They walked past a booth selling handmade soaps, the vendor calling out about lavender and rosemary scents that reminded Quinn of the gardens at her third foster home, the one where she'd stayed longest, nearly 2 years, with a woman named Carol who'd taught her basic woodworking in the garage. Carol had been the first person to tell Quinn she was good with her hands, good at building things that lasted. Quinn barely heard the soap vendor's pitch. Her mind was already working, already turning over the possibilities like pieces of which she was considering for a project. Brooks and Marcy thought they could just dismiss her, write her off, pretend she didn't exist when it was convenient. They were about to learn that Quinn Marlowe was not someone you discarded lightly. "You're planning something," Tate said, stopping to examine a display of kitchen knives. His weathered hands picked up a santoku, testing its balance with the expertise of someone who'd spent 20 years cooking for himself. "I can see it in your face." Quinn selected a Honeycrisp apple from the adjacent fruit stand, turning it over in her hands to check for bruises. The vendor, a woman about her mother's age with dirt under her fingernails and genuine smile lines, nodded approvingly at her careful selection. "Maybe," Quinn said, paying for the apple with exact change. "Quinn." Tate set down the knife and looked at her with the kind of serious expression he usually reserved for discussing safety protocols in the workshop. "I've known you since you were 19 and angrier than a wet cat someone threw in a river. I've seen what happens when people underestimate you. Just make sure whatever you're thinking is worth it." Quinn smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, it will be." The dynamics of her family had always been jagged, like broken glass that cut you if you held it wrong. Brooks, 2 years older and perpetually golden in their parents' eyes. Eleanor, their mother, who'd spent Quinn's entire life trying to smooth her rough edges into something more acceptable. And now Marcy, who'd slotted herself perfectly into the family hierarchy by being everything Quinn wasn't: polished, predictable, safe. Quinn had learned early that loyalty was earned, not assumed. Foster homes had taught her that blood meant nothing if it wasn't backed up by action. She'd thought, foolishly, that building her own success might finally earn her a place at the table. She'd been wrong. "Never again," she said quietly, watching a family share funnel cake near the fountain. "Never again will they dismiss me without consequence." Tate bought them coffee from a cart, the steam rising in the cool morning air. "What does that mean, exactly?" Quinn took a sip, savoring the bitter heat. "It means they just declared war. They just don't know it yet." The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the dinner that wasn't. Quinn was in her workshop, applying a final coat of stain to a custom dining table when her phone rang. Brooks' name flashed on the screen. She let it ring 3 times before answering. "Quinn, hey." Brooks' voice carried a note of mild panic that immediately caught her attention. "I've got a situation. The card didn't go through for the dinner last week. Did you forget to pay the bill?" Quinn set down her brush with deliberate care. The corporate card. She'd given it to him months ago when wedding planning started, told him to use it for emergencies since his own credit was maxed out from law school loans and his expensive lifestyle. "Which dinner?" she asked, her voice perfectly calm. "The engagement dinner, at La Bernardine, the one we—" He stopped himself, probably remembering that she hadn't been there. "Oh, that dinner." Quinn walked to the window, looking out at the street where afternoon traffic was beginning to build. The one I wasn't invited to. Silence on the other end of the line. Quinn, listen. No, you listen. Her voice was still calm, still pleasant, almost playful. I did warn you, didn't I? About the card. What? No, you never. I'm sure I mentioned it. Memory's funny that way. Quinn smiled at her reflection in the window. Besides, I thought it was just for close family. Shouldn't close family be able to cover their own dinners? Quinn, come on. Don't be like this. Like what? Helpful? I thought I was being helpful by giving you access to the card in the first place. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Tell you what, I'll take care of it this time. But Brooks? Yeah. Next time you want to use my card for a family dinner, maybe make sure I'm actually part of the family you're feeding. She hung up before he could respond. Quinn stared at her phone for a long moment, then set it aside and went back to her staining. But her mind wasn't on the wood grain or the careful application of color. It was spinning, calculating, seeing patterns and possibilities that hadn't been there an hour ago. The dinner snub hadn't been just a slight. It had been a declaration, a statement about who mattered and who didn't, about who belonged and who was just useful enough to keep around. Brooks had made his position clear. So had Marcy. So had their mother, who'd undoubtedly been at the dinner, nodding along with the decision to exclude Quinn. Fine. Quinn finished the table, her hands steady and sure. She cleaned her brushes, organized her tools, locked up the workshop. And all the while her mind was working, planning, seeing not just the dinner snub, but years of accumulated dismissals and casual cruelties, seeing them not as separate incidents, but as part of a larger pattern that was about to change. She didn't just want to embarrass them. She wanted to hit every single nerve they had. She wanted to remind them that dismissing Quinn Marlowe was the kind of mistake you only made once. The card declined at dinner was just the beginning. Brooks panicking about money, about his image, about what people would think. That was information. That was leverage. And Quinn had always been very good at leverage point 3 days after Brooks' panic phone call. Quinn sat across from Marcy's cousin at Stumptown Coffee in the Pearl District, a trendy spot where tech workers typed furiously on laptops between sips of single-origin pour-overs. The exposed brick walls and industrial lighting created the kind of atmosphere that made people feel both sophisticated and comfortable enough to share secrets. Jen Lowell was 26, worked in social media marketing for a sustainable fashion brand, and had always felt overshadowed by her perfect cousin. Quinn had remembered this dynamic from small talk at last year's family barbecue, where Jen had spent most of the evening looking uncomfortable while Marcy held court about her latest sponsorship deals and lifestyle brand partnerships. I just think it's weird, you know. Jen was saying, stirring honey into her oat milk latte with more force than necessary. Steam rose from the cup, creating a small cloud between them. The way Marcy acts like she invented weddings, like she's the first person to ever get married and everyone else should take notes. Quinn nodded sympathetically, cradling her own coffee, a simple Americano that reminded her of the truck stop coffee she'd grown up drinking. She does seem very focused on the details. Focused. Jen laughed, but there was no humor in it. Her voice dropped to the conspiratorial tone people used in coffee shops when sharing gossip. She made my mom cry last month because the font on the shower invitations wasn't cohesive with her brand. Her brand. It's a wedding, not a product launch. My mom spent her own money on those invitations, drove to 3 different print shops to get them perfect, and Marcy acted like she'd personally sabotaged the entire event. Quinn filed this information away in the mental folder she was building. Brand, image, control, public perception, all useful pressure points. How's the planning going overall? Quinn asked, keeping her tone light and curious rather than probing. She'd learned early in foster care that the best way to get information was to let people want to tell you things. Honestly, I think they're in over their heads, financially. Jen glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned closer. Marcy keeps posting about all these vendors and venues, making it look like everything's perfect, but she's been calling around asking for payment plans. And Brooks. She lowered her voice even further. I heard him on the phone with his boss last week when I was at their apartment. Something about needing to make partner this year, or they're screwed. He sounded desperate. More information. More pressure points. Quinn bought Jen another coffee and listened to 30 more minutes of complaints about Marcy's bridezilla behavior. By the time they parted ways, Quinn had a clearer picture of the wedding planning chaos and the financial strain it was causing. That evening, Quinn met her old college roommate Sarah Chin for drinks at Kennard, a wine bar in southeast Portland known for its natural wines and intimate atmosphere. The space was small and dimly lit, with exposed wood beams and mismatched vintage furniture that created the perfect environment for confidential conversations. Sarah worked in corporate law now, different firm than Brooks, but same legal ecosystem. Same gossip network, same professional circles where reputations were made and destroyed over cocktails and networking events. Brooks Marlowe. Sarah paused with her glass of Oregon Pinot Noir halfway to her lips, thinking, yeah, I know him. Smart guy, but arrogant in that way law school breeds into some people. Works at Patterson and Associates, right? Victor Ardsley's firm. That's the one. Quinn sipped her own wine, a lighter varietal that complemented the charcuterie board they were sharing. There's been some talk lately. He's been pushing hard for partner, but there was some incident a few months back. Something about a missed deadline on a major environmental lawsuit. Cost the client a lot of money, and Victor wasn't happy. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to the kind of whisper lawyers used when discussing professional failures. Word is that Brooks tried to cover it up, blamed it on a paralegal who quit right after. But Victor's not stupid. He knows when someone's lying to save their own skin. Quinn absorbed this information like a sponge, adding another piece to her growing understanding of Brooks' vulnerabilities. What kind of man is Victor Ardsley? Old school, Harvard Law, built the firm from nothing over 30 years. He values integrity above everything else, and he doesn't give second chances. If you screw up, you better own it completely or you're out. Sarah refilled their glasses from the bottle. Why the sudden interest in your brother's career? Family drama. Quinn smiled, swirling her wine to watch it catch the candlelight. Something like that. Well, if you want my professional opinion, Brooks is exactly the type who looks good on paper, but cracks under real pressure. And from what I hear through the grapevine, Victor Ardsley has been looking for an excuse to clean house. Partnership decisions are coming up in the next few months, and there are more candidates than spots available. Quinn absorbed this, adding it to her growing collection of useful facts. Brooks' career was more fragile than he let on. Victor Ardsley was demanding, unforgiving. The partnership Brooks was counting on was far from guaranteed. By the end of the week, Quinn had a detailed map of her targets, vulnerabilities. Brooks needed to impress Victor to secure his partnership. Marcy's influencer career depended on maintaining her image as someone who had everything together. The wedding was their chance to showcase their success, but they were running on borrowed money and borrowed time. Quinn didn't just want to embarrass them. She wanted to dismantle the carefully constructed image they'd built, piece by piece. The plan required help, and Quinn knew exactly where to find it. Her first call was to Gina Turlow, an old college acquaintance who now ran Sage and Stone Catering, a high-end company specializing in weddings and corporate events. They'd stayed in loose touch over the years, mostly through LinkedIn updates and the occasional industry networking event where small business owners gathered to share war stories about difficult clients. Quinn Marlowe. What a surprise, Gina said when she answered, her voice carrying the kind of warmth that came from genuine friendship. How's the furniture empire? Booming, actually. Just delivered a custom dining set to a tech executive who paid enough to cover my rent for 3 months. Quinn settled into the vintage leather chair in her office, surrounded by design books and wood samples. I'm calling because I need some professional advice about the wedding industry. They arranged to meet for lunch at Le Pigeon, a French restaurant. Gina had catered a private event for the week before. The intimate space buzzed with the kind of conversation that happened when food industry professionals gathered, talk of suppliers, seasonal ingredients, and the eternal challenge of managing client expectations. So what's this really about? Gina asked over her salade lyonnaise, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. You didn't call me to discuss catering theory. Quinn chose her words carefully, the way she selected wood for a particularly challenging joint. My brother's getting married next month. Big wedding. Lots of pressure to impress the right people. The bride has been challenging with vendors. Gina's expression shifted, becoming more interested. She dealt with difficult brides before. Quinn could see it in the slight tightening around her eyes. How challenging are we talking? The kind of challenging that makes vendors want to teach lessons about treating service providers with respect. Quinn cut a piece of her duck breast, savoring the perfectly balanced flavors, the kind where someone might discover that perfection requires a little more time and patience than originally anticipated. Ah. Gina set down her fork and leaned back in her chair. And you're wondering if these lessons might occur naturally through the normal course of business complications. Hypothetically speaking, the dress delivery delay would be remarkably easy to arrange. Gina's voice carried the confidence of someone who understood the intricate web of wedding vendor relationships. I know Rebecca, the owner of the boutique they're using. She's had problems with entitled brides before, clients who treat her seamstresses like servants and then expect miracles when they change their minds at the last minute. Quinn nodded encouragingly. If someone were to suggest that the final fitting revealed issues that required additional alterations, perhaps the bride had lost or gained weight, or decided she wanted modifications to the neckline that could easily delay delivery by several days, just long enough to create panic without actually ruining the wedding. That someone wouldn't be me, of course. Of course not. And the vendor payment issues. Gina smiled, the expression of someone who enjoyed elegant solutions to complex problems. Wedding vendors talk to each other constantly. We're a small community, and we share information about payment problems, difficult clients, red flags to watch for. If word got around that a particular couple was having cash flow issues, suddenly everyone would want their deposits up front. It's just good business practice. They shook hands over dessert, and Quinn felt the first real satisfaction she'd experienced since reading Brooke's text message. Her second recruit was even easier to secure. Orrin Pike had been in a desperate situation 3 years ago. Behind on rent, expensive sound equipment stolen from his van, facing bankruptcy and the loss of everything he'd worked to build. Quinn had hired him for a workshop event she was hosting for interior designers, paid him double his usual rate, and then spent the evening recommending him to other clients who needed audiovisual services. Within 6 months, Orrin's business was not just stable, but thriving. He'd expanded from solo gigs to a small team, upgraded his equipment, and moved into a proper office space. He never forgot who'd thrown him a lifeline when he was drowning. Whatever you need, Orrin said when Quinn explained the situation over coffee at a diner near his office. He was a lean man in his early 30s with the kind of technical precision that made him excellent at his job and the loyalty that made him an ideal ally. These sound like people who need to learn some humility. Orrin specialized in audiovisual setups for events of all kinds: weddings, corporate parties, anniversary celebrations, product launches. He knew how to make technology work seamlessly, invisible to guests who just wanted to enjoy themselves. But he also knew exactly how to make it fail in very specific, very public ways. The slideshow idea is brilliant, he said, sketching out technical diagrams on a napkin. I can set it up to look like a complete equipment malfunction. Wrong files loaded accidentally, backup systems failing at just the right moment, totally believable technical difficulties. And the timing can be surgical, right when everyone's relaxed and enjoying themselves, when their guard is down. Quinn provided him with the photos she'd obtained through a combination of careful social media research and a well-timed conversation with Brooks' paralegal friend Jennifer at Murphy's Pub, a bar popular with legal professionals. Jennifer had been more than happy to share stories about her handsome boss after 3 glasses of wine and some sympathetic listening about the challenges of working in a male-dominated field. The photos weren't explicitly inappropriate. Quinn wasn't interested in destroying lives, just exposing hypocrisy. But they were damaging enough to raise questions about Brooks' judgment and professionalism, especially when displayed in front of Victor Ardsley and every important person in his professional and personal circles. With Gina and Oren on board, Quinn began implementing the financial pressure component of her plan. She'd learned from Jen that several wedding vendors were already concerned about payment. A few strategic phone calls, posing as concerned colleagues in the industry, were enough to escalate those concerns into demands for immediate payment. The bridal gown delivery delay was even easier. Gina's contact at the boutique was happy to discover concerns about the final fitting that would require additional alterations. Nothing that would actually prevent the dress from being ready, just enough delay to create panic. And for Brooks' professional troubles, Quinn didn't need to create problems, she just needed to amplify existing ones. The missed deadline Sarah had mentioned was already public knowledge in legal circles. A few strategic conversations with mutual acquaintances were enough to ensure that Victor Ardsley heard about it again. Just as Brooks was pushing for his partnership decision, Quinn was applying the final coat of varnish to a custom bookshelf when the memories hit her. The smell of the wood stain, the methodical strokes of the brush, it all reminded her of the cabin. Their father's cabin, technically. The one he'd built himself over 3 summers, working weekends and vacations until he had a perfect retreat nestled in the Cascade Mountains. Quinn had spent her happiest childhood moments there, learning to use tools, helping with repairs, feeling useful and wanted in a way that never happened at home. When their father died, Quinn was 19 and drowning in college loans. Brooks was 21 and already planning law school. Eleanor was overwhelmed with grief and financial pressure. "It's for tax reasons," Brooks had explained, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "If we transfer your share to me now, it simplifies the estate. You'll still have access whenever you want. It's just paperwork." Quinn had signed. She'd trusted him. She'd believed that family meant something. 6 months later, Brooks sold the cabin to pay for law school. Didn't tell her until the papers were already filed. Didn't offer her a share of the proceeds. Just called one afternoon and mentioned it casually, like he'd sold an old car. "You don't even use it," he'd said when she confronted him. "And I needed the money for school. It's not like you have a sentimental attachment to the place." But she had. The cabin represented the only time she'd felt like she belonged somewhere, the only place where her father had seemed proud of her practical skills instead of disappointed by her lack of social polish. Brooks had taken that away from her for tuition money. Money he could have borrowed, could have earned, could have gotten from their mother who'd always favored him anyway. That betrayal had taught Quinn a rule she'd never forgotten. Never forgive, never forget. This wasn't about the dinner. The dinner was just the latest in a long line of dismissals and betrayals. This was about justice with 29 years of interest. Quinn finished the bookshelf and stepped back to admire her work. The wood gleamed in the workshop lights, every joint perfect, every surface smooth. It would last for generations if treated properly. It would endure, just like her memory, just like her patience, just like her plan. The Willamette Valley Vineyard sat on rolling hills 40 miles outside Eugene. Its manicured grounds dotted with century-old oak trees and rose gardens that looked like something from a European postcard. The venue charged premium prices for its picturesque setting, complete with a restored 1920s manor house and sweeping views of the valley below. Quinn had driven down that morning in her silver BMW, taking Highway 99W through small towns and farmland, listening to jazz and enjoying the late summer weather that made Oregon feel like paradise as she'd booked a room at the Beckham estate, a boutique bed and breakfast 10 minutes from the vineyard, telling herself she might want to stay the night rather than drive back to Portland after what promised to be a long celebration. Really, she wanted to be close enough to observe the aftermath of her carefully orchestrated plan. The wedding was scheduled for 4 o'clock, with cocktails beginning at 3 on the vineyard's stone terrace. Quinn arrived at exactly 3:30, deliberately late enough to make an entrance, but not so late as to miss any important developments. She parked between a Tesla and a Range Rover, noting the expensive taste of the guest list, exactly the kind of audience Brooks and Marcy needed to impress. Her dress had been worth every penny of its considerable cost black silk that moved like water against her skin, sophisticated enough for an upscale vineyard wedding, but striking enough to turn heads. The designer, Maya Okonkwo, specialized in custom pieces for professional women who understood that clothing was armor. The dress fit Quinn like it had been sewn directly onto her body, which in a sense it had been, after 3 fittings and countless adjustments to achieve perfection. The guest area buzzed with the kind of conversation that happened when successful people gathered to celebrate talk of recent vacations, business deals, real estate investments, and children's accomplishments. Quinn noticed the undercurrent of tension immediately, the way conversations paused when certain people approached, the subtle body language that indicated all was not well in paradise. Brooks stood near the bar with his groomsmen, a collection of lawyers and college friends who looked prosperous but nervous. His face was pale beneath his summer tan, and his phone was permanently attached to his ear like a life support device. Every few minutes, he'd step away from the group to take another call, his expression growing more strained with each conversation. His best man, a corporate lawyer named Derek, whom Quinn remembered from previous family gatherings, kept shooting worried glances in his direction. Quinn accepted a glass of champagne from a server, a crisp Oregon sparkling wine that probably cost more per bottle than most people spent on dinner, and made her way through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. She listened to fragments of conversation, picking up useful information like a prospector panning for gold. Still hasn't arrived, and the ceremony is supposed to start in 15 minutes. Never seen a groom look so stressed on his wedding day. Heard there were some problems at his firm. Financial issues, maybe? You know how expensive these weddings can get. Near the bridal suite in the manor house, Quinn caught sight of Marcy through an open French door. The bride was pacing back and forth across Persian rugs that probably cost more than most people's cars, still in her silk robe and hair rollers, her face twisted with the kind of frustration that came from plans falling apart at the worst possible moment. Her bridesmaids, a collection of perfectly groomed women in matching robes, huddled around her like anxious courtiers trying to manage a queen's tantrum. Quinn moved closer, positioning herself near a window where she could hear the conversation without being obvious about eavesdropping. "What do you mean it's not ready?" Marcy's voice carried across the courtyard, high and sharp with panic. "The wedding is in 15 minutes. This is completely unacceptable." The wedding planner, a professional woman in her 40s who'd probably seen every possible wedding disaster, was trying to maintain calm while dealing with what was clearly a 5-alarm crisis. "I understand your concern, Ms. Lowell, but the boutique says there were last-minute alterations that couldn't be rushed. The dress is on its way now. It should be here within. I don't care about alterations." Marcy's voice rose to a shriek that probably scared birds from nearby trees. "I don't care about their excuses. I need my dress now, not in 10 minutes, not in 5 minutes, now." One of the bridesmaids, Quinn recognized her as Marcy's college roommate, tried to intervene. "Marcy, honey, maybe we should just—" "Don't tell me to calm down." Marcy whirled around, her carefully applied makeup starting to smudge with stress sweat. "This is supposed to be the most perfect day of my life, and everything is falling apart. The dress, Brooks acting like a crazy person, vendors calling about money. This is a disaster." Quinn smiled behind her champagne glass and took another sip of the excellent sparkling wine. The gown delay was working even better than she'd hoped. Marcy's carefully constructed image of effortless perfection was cracking under pressure, revealing the entitled, controlling personality underneath. She positioned herself near a group that included Victor Ardsley, Brooks' boss and the man who held his professional future in his hands. Victor was a distinguished man in his early 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He radiated the kind of quiet authority that came from 30 years building one of Oregon's most prestigious law firms, known throughout the Pacific Northwest for high standards and zero tolerance for ethical lapses. Shame about the Patterson situation. One of the guests was saying a man Quinn recognized as another lawyer from the Portland legal community. I heard there were some serious problems with client confidentiality, missed deadlines, mishandled files. Victor's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, the kind of subtle change that people who knew him well would recognize as significant displeasure. We're handling the matter internally. Still, must be difficult timing with the partnership decisions coming up in September. I imagine situations like that make those choices more complicated. Quinn moved closer, pretending to admire the vineyard's meticulously maintained gardens while listening to every word. From Victor's increasingly rigid posture and the careful way he was choosing his responses, it was clear that Brooks' professional troubles were far more serious and far more public than she'd initially realized. The ceremony was delayed by 20 minutes, while Marcy's dress was rushed from the boutique. When she finally appeared, she looked beautiful but frazzled, her smile tight and her eyes scanning the crowd as if looking for problems. Brooks managed to pull himself together for the vows, but Quinn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand shook slightly as he slipped the ring onto Marcy's finger. During the cocktail hour that followed, Quinn worked the room like the entrepreneur she was. She complimented Eleanor's outfit, chatted with distant relatives about the vineyard's history, and made polite conversation with Marcy's influencer friends about their various projects and sponsorships. And one mentioned the engagement dinner. No one acknowledged that she'd been excluded from the family celebration. They all acted as if nothing had happened, as if the slight had been imagined or forgotten. Quinn played along perfectly, smiling and laughing and being gracious, all while keeping one eye on Orrin Pike, who was managing the sound system for the reception with professional efficiency. Dinner was served at 7, followed by speeches from both families. Eleanor gave a tearful tribute to the happy couple. Marcy's father talked about gaining a son. Brooks' best man told embarrassing stories from college that made everyone laugh. Quinn sat at the singles table, making conversation with Marcy's cousin Jen and a few other guests who'd been relegated to the social margins. She watched Brooks relax as the evening progressed, saw him start to believe that maybe his problems could be forgotten for one night. To 8:30, the band started playing for the first dance. Brooks and Marcy swayed together to a song Quinn didn't recognize, looking for the first time like a genuinely happy couple. The photographer moved around them like a shark, capturing every angle. Every smiled, a T9 o'clock. The band took a break, and Orrin stepped forward to announce that they'd prepared a special slideshow of photos from Brooks and Marcy's relationship. The lights dimmed, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. "Before we continue with dancing," Orrin said into the microphone, "the happy couple has put together some special memories to share with all of you." The slideshow began with sweet photos from their early dating days. Brooks and Marcy at restaurants, on vacation at various events. The crowd awed, appropriately as the images flashed by, each one accompanied by soft instrumental music. Quinn checked her watch. In exactly 30 seconds, the real show would begin, but she had one more move to make first. 3 hours earlier. She'd sent Marcy a text message from an anonymous number. "Thought you should know there are photos of Brooks floating around from the firm retreat last month. Some of them are compromising. Might want to ask him about Jennifer the paralegal before someone else brings it up." She'd sent it early enough for Marcy to stew on it, late enough that she wouldn't have time to investigate properly. Perfect timing to let paranoia and wedding stress do most of the work. Now, as the slideshow played, Quinn watched Marcy's face. She could see the moment when the bride started thinking about the text, started looking at the photos with suspicion instead of nostalgia. The slideshow reached the end of the innocent photos. For a moment, the screen went black, then new images began to appear. Brooks at a bar, his arm around a young woman who definitely wasn't Marcy. Brooks and the same woman sharing what looked like an intimate conversation at a restaurant. Brooks walking the woman to her car, standing close enough that their relationship was clearly more than professional. The photos weren't explicitly inappropriate. Quinn wasn't interested in destroying lives, just reputations. But they were damaging enough, especially displayed in front of Victor Ardsley and every important person in Brooks' professional and personal life. The crowd fell silent. Someone gasped. Quinn heard Marcy make a small, choked sound next to Brooks. Oren was already at the controls, frantically trying to fix what appeared to be a technical malfunction. "I'm so sorry," he announced. "We seem to be having some equipment issues. Let me get this sorted out." But the damage was done. The photos had played for nearly a minute, long enough for everyone to see them, long enough for the implications to sink in. Brooks stood frozen, his face white as paper. Around the room, guests whispered and pointed and took out their phones to capture the chaos. And Marcy beautiful, image-conscious Marcy, who'd spent 2 years planning the perfect wedding, finally snapped. "You son of a bitch," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "You cheating son of a bitch." Brooks turned to her, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "Don't," Marcy said, backing away from him. "Don't you dare try to explain this. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Marcy, please, it's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like." Her voice rose to a shriek that carried across the entire vineyard. "You've been screwing your paralegal, and now everyone knows it." The crowd was frozen, watching the drama unfold like a car accident they couldn't look away from. Quinn saw Victor Ardsley's face, saw the disgust and disappointment there, saw Marcy's influencer friends frantically trying to figure out whether they should be filming this or pretending it wasn't happening. "Marcy, calm down," Brooks said, reaching for her arm. "We can talk about this privately." "Privately?" Marcy laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "Like you talked privately with Jennifer? Like you privately destroyed our wedding in front of everyone we know?" She yanked off her engagement ring and threw it at him. It bounced off his chest and skittered across the dance floor, coming to rest near Quinn's table. "You want to humiliate me?" Marcy continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "You want to make me look like a fool? Fine, but I'm not going down alone." What followed was 5 minutes of the most spectacular public breakdown Quinn had ever witnessed, and she'd seen some impressive meltdowns during her foster care years. Marcy aired every grievance, every private fight, every financial worry that had been building pressure in their relationship like steam in a kettle without a release valve. Her voice carried across the entire vineyard, reaching guests who'd wandered toward the gardens and probably some who were still in the parking lot. She talked about Brooks' maxed-out credit cards, all 4 of them, with balances that made Quinn's eyebrows rise even though she'd expected financial problems. She mentioned the student loans in default, the rent payments that had been late 3 months running, the car payment he'd missed twice because he'd spent the money on expensive dinners trying to impress clients who ended up going with other firms anyway. "You want to know about Brooks Marlowe?" Marcy addressed the crowd like she was giving a testimony at a trial, her wedding dress pristine, but her makeup ruined by tears of rage. He borrowed money from his sister and used it for personal expenses, including paying for dinners he didn't even invite her to. He lied to me about making partner, lied about our financial situation, lied about that paralegal he's been screwing for 6 months. Eleanor Marlowe tried to approach her daughter-in-law-to-be, her face pale with embarrassment and probably genuine concern. "Marcy, dear, perhaps we should." "Don't you dare dear me." Marcy whirled around, pointing an accusatory finger at Eleanor. You raised him to think he's entitled to everything. You taught him that rules don't apply to Golden Boy Brooks, that he can lie and cheat and steal, and someone will always clean up his messes. The crowd was frozen in the kind of fascinated horror that people felt watching natural disasters on television. Except this was happening live in front of them. Cell phones appeared as guests started recording, Instagram stories and TikTok videos that would immortalize this moment forever. Quinn could practically see Marcy's influencer career evaporating in real time as her carefully curated image crumbled, like a house built on sand. Brooks stood in the center of it all, his face cycling through expressions of shock, humiliation, and growing anger. His groomsmen had backed away, creating a circle of empty space around him like he'd developed a contagious disease. Even his best man, Derek, was edging toward the exit, clearly calculating whether his friendship was worth being associated with this level of public disgrace. "Marcy, that's enough," Brooks finally said, his voice carrying the kind of authority he probably used in courtrooms. "You're making a scene." "Making a scene?" Marcy laughed, but it sounded more like a howl. "I'm making a scene? You think this is bad? You haven't seen anything yet." She reached into her bouquet and pulled out her phone, holding it up like a weapon. "Should I tell everyone about the trust fund you claim to have? The one that doesn't exist? Or maybe about how you forged my signature on our apartment lease because your credit was too bad to qualify? Or should I start with the gambling debt you forgot to mention?" Each revelation hit the crowd like a physical blow. Quinn watched Victor Ardsley's face transform from mild disapproval to complete disgust, watched other guests pulling out their own phones to document the carnage. She saw Marcy's parents trying to reach their daughter through the crowd, saw Brooks' groomsmen quietly slipping away toward the parking lot. By the time Marcy finished her public enumeration of Brooks' failures, his reputation wasn't just damaged, it was obliterated. His professional life was destroyed. His relationship was over. His family was humiliated. And everyone who mattered in his world had witnessed the complete and total collapse of everything he'd worked to build. Quinn left the wedding at 10:30, while the cleanup was still ongoing. She'd watched long enough to see Victor Ardsley leave without speaking to Brooks, long enough to see Marcy's parents escort their sobbing daughter to their car, long enough to see Brooks standing alone near the bar with his head in his hands. Eleanor had tried to corner Quinn before she left, had started to say something about family loyalty and forgiveness. Quinn had cut her off with a smile. "Just close family, remember," she'd said sweetly. "I wouldn't want to overstep." The drive back to Portland gave Quinn time to think, time to process what she'd accomplished. The plan had worked better than she'd dared hope. Marcy's public meltdown had been the perfect finishing touch, ensuring that the damage would spread far beyond the wedding itself. By Monday morning, the fallout was complete. Brooks was suspended from his firm, pending an investigation into client confidentiality breaches and professional conduct issues. The photos at the wedding had been the final straw for Victor Ardsley, who'd apparently been looking for an excuse to cut ties with an employee he'd lost faith in months ago. Marcy's influencer career imploded as sponsors pulled out, citing negative press and brand misalignment. Her carefully curated image as a successful young woman living her best life was replaced overnight by headlines about wedding disasters and public breakdowns. The wedding venue required payment for damages to their reputation and additional cleanup costs. The photographer refused to deliver the final images. Half the vendors demanded immediate payment for their services, threatening legal action if their invoices weren't settled within 30 days. Quinn heard all of this through her network of contacts, through social media, through the general gossip that followed any spectacular public disaster. She listened with the satisfaction of someone who'd played a long game perfectly. Tuesday evening, Eleanor called. "Quinn, we need to talk about what happened at the wedding." "What about it?" Quinn was in her workshop, putting the finishing touches on a custom armoire that would be delivered to a client in the morning. "You know what about it? This family disgrace, this humiliation." I'm not sure what you're accusing me of, Mom. Don't play innocent with me. I know you had something to do with this. Quinn set down her sandpaper and gave the conversation her full attention. Even if I did, which I'm not saying I did, what exactly is the problem? Brooks made his choices. Marcy made hers. They're both adults. The problem is that you've destroyed your brother's career over a petty slight. Petty. Quinn's voice went cold. Being excluded from family events is petty? Being treated like I don't exist unless you need something is petty. Quinn. No, Mom. You had your chance to treat me like family. You chose not to. Brooks chose not to. Marcy chose not to. So don't call me now and expect me to clean up the mess you all made. There was silence on the other end of the line. Just close family, right? Quinn said gently. That's what Brooks said. So handle it as close family. Don't involve the outsider. She hung up before Eleanor could respond. Quinn's business, meanwhile, was booming. The black dress moment had gone viral on social media, with fashion bloggers and style influencers sharing photos and asking about the designer. Her furniture company's Instagram account had gained 3,000 followers overnight, and she'd received 6 new commission requests just that week. Success, it turned out, was the best revenge of all. Wednesday afternoon, Quinn met Tate for coffee at their usual spot near the workshop. He studied her face across the table, reading the satisfaction there. You did it, he said. It wasn't a question. Did what? Whatever you were planning. You got them. Quinn stirred sugar into her coffee, taking her time with the answer. They got themselves. I just provided some context. And how do you feel about it? Quinn considered the question seriously. She thought about Brooks, probably struggling to find a new job with his reputation in ruins. About Marcy, dealing with the collapse of both her relationship and her career. About Eleanor, trying to hold together a family that had never really been whole in the first place. She waited for guilt to arrive. For regret. For some sign that she'd gone too far. Nothing came. I feel like justice was served, she said finally. I feel like people learned there are consequences for their actions. And you're okay with those consequences. Quinn met his eyes across the table. Tate, they excluded me from a family dinner and then had the audacity to use my credit card to pay for it. They've spent 29 years treating me like I'm disposable, like I don't matter. She paused, watching pedestrians walk past the coffee shop window. I don't forgive people who betray me, she continued. I don't forget, and I don't let them do it twice. Tate nodded slowly. And Brooks? Marcy? Your mom. What about them? You think they learned their lesson? Quinn smiled, and for the first time in weeks it reached her eyes. Oh, I know they did. They'll never underestimate me again. They'll never dismiss me again. They'll never assume I'm someone they can safely ignore. That night, Quinn went to bed in her converted loft apartment above the workshop, surrounded by the smell of wood and varnish and the satisfaction of work well done. She'd built something beautiful and lasting with her business, something that belonged entirely to her. She'd also built something else, a reputation as someone who shouldn't be crossed, someone who remembered everything and forgave nothing. I end the darkness. She listened to the sounds of the city outside her windows and smiled. Quinn Marlowe didn't forgive. Quinn Marlowe didn't forget. And Quinn Marlowe slept very well indeed.